Hey guys, tonight we wander into the whispers of time itself, where shadows of ancient lives stretch longer than the sun ever could. You probably won't survive this journey without a little awe, or maybe a gentle shiver. You find yourself perched on the edge of prehistory, where the first hints of human thought float like mist across empty valleys. You can almost hear the soft murmurs of someone learning to shape fire, or the cautious steps of a hunter tracking his first prey. The air smells faintly of wet earth, a scent that belongs both to memory and imagination. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? It's fascinating to see where we're all drifting off to sleep tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift among the earliest humans, who live with nothing but instinct and curiosity. Imagine the cold biting at their fingers as they discover that rubbing two sticks together can coax sparks into life. The first fires are fragile, threatening, yet somehow miraculous. Sparks dance like tiny fireflies against the darkness, illuminating faces etched with wonder and fear. Scholars still argue whether these fires were used primarily for warmth, cooking, or perhaps even for the strange kind of comfort that comes from seeing a small sphere of control in a vast, indifferent world. You wander along trails worn into the soil by creatures and humans alike. Tiny bones crunch beneath your feet, long forgotten remnants of meals and misadventures. You notice an odd detail. Some early humans decorated their shelters with rudimentary carvings, crude patterns that suggest more than survival, they suggest play, or even the first sparks of storytelling. You imagine them huddled together at night, whispering these tales, a primitive lullaby meant for their own ears and maybe the stars above. There's a rhythm here, a pulse beneath the silence. Each footstep, each flicker of firelight, links you to countless lives that passed through this world before cities, before empires. The cold wind whistles through caves, teasing your senses with what could be a predator, or perhaps just the echo of another human's voice from millennia ago. You pause, listening, feeling the weight of all that human potential swirling around you. The landscape is merciless but mesmerizing. You trace faint scratches on rocks, marks that might be a map, a warning, or just the idle doodling of boredom long before clocks existed. Scholars still debate whether these early markings were purely functional or the beginning of symbolic thought, the roots of language itself. You can almost hear a cheeky voice from the past, whispering, "Yes, humans, your little etchings might just outlast your breakfast." You chuckle softly, letting the sound mingle with the crackle of your imagined campfire. As you wander further, you notice the delicate balance between survival and discovery. One wrong step could lead to hunger, or worse. Yet these first humans persist, inventing tools, learning to communicate through gestures, grunts, and the occasional triumphant shout. You imagine a small child clutching a carved stick, staring into the fire, dreaming unknowable dreams. Oddly, despite the danger, there's a certain serenity here. Life is immediate, raw, and breathtakingly simple, yet layered with the complexities of innovation and imagination. The night deepens, and the world around you seems to breathe with you. The stars peek through gaps in the clouds, silent witnesses to the earliest human curiosity. You lie back on soft earth, listening to the distant howl of a predator, the rustle of leaves, the murmur of water nearby. The sensation is grounding, almost hypnotic. Oddly enough, some humans are rumored to have danced beneath the stars in moments of sheer joy, or perhaps ritual. Scholars still argue whether these dances were for spiritual connection, entertainment, or a subtle practice of early coordination skills. You let yourself smile at the thought, imagining their shadowy forms flickering in firelight. Time stretches. You drift between moments, feeling the pulse of early civilization slowly taking shape beneath your skin. The first whispers of language, the tentative sparks of artistry, the instinctual steps of survival, they weave together, forming a tapestry you can almost touch. You breathe deeply, letting the cool night air fill your lungs, imagining yourself as both observer and participant. Every sensation, the crunch of leaves, the warmth of the fire, the distant stars, is amplified in this quiet space between history and dream. You begin to sense a gentle transition, the subtle heartbeat of civilization stirring in the darkness. Each flicker of flame, each cautious footprint, each whispered secret contributes to a rhythm that will eventually crescendo into villages, towns, and cities. And yet, for now, it's quiet. Perfectly quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel small and infinite at once. You curl slightly, letting your imagination drift along with the firelight, knowing that the stories you're about to hear are born from this very quiet, this very awe. As your eyelids grow heavy, you linger on one final thought. The earliest humans were not unlike you tonight. They sought warmth, comfort, a story, and perhaps a moment of wonder. And in that shared desire, time collapses. You feel connected, a strand in a long, intricate web of whispered histories stretching into the void. And as you sink deeper into the imagined night, you realize the journey has only just begun. You step lightly into the gentle glow of early village life, where smoke curls lazily from the first clustered huts and the air carries the scent of baked grains and damp earth. It feels almost magical, as if the land itself is leaning in to watch these small human communities take shape. You wander along narrow paths worn into the soil, noticing how each dwelling is uniquely shaped, like fingerprints of creativity pressed into mud and straw. You probably won't survive the charm of seeing these tiny civilizations spring from nothing, but you try anyway, letting yourself drift alongside their rhythms. The villages are modest, yet they pulse with life. Children scamper barefoot through the dirt, laughing at invisible games. Elders sit on wooden benches, cracking nuts or mending garments while exchanging whispered advice. Animals, dogs, goats, maybe even a wary cat, move casually among humans, as though recognizing a new social order forming. You take a deep breath and notice the odd detail. Some huts are decorated with small painted symbols, abstract spirals or simple geometric shapes. Scholars still argue whether these designs were merely decorative, talismans of luck, or the first seeds of written language. You smile, imagining a child tracing these lines absent-mindedly, dreaming of shapes that will one day tell stories centuries later. The streets, if you can call them that, are alive with commerce of a very different kind. You pass by someone grinding grain, another shaping clay into pots, and someone humming while weaving reeds. Even in their simplicity, there's an undeniable elegance here, a rhythm that reminds you of modern life but slowed down, deliberate, tangible. You notice that trade is emerging, even in such tiny circles. Bartering is subtle. A carved figurine exchanged for a handful of dried berries, a simple yet profound negotiation that reflects both survival and the first inklings of community trust. Oddly, some villagers seem to follow peculiar superstitions, placing small stones in doorways for protection, whispering to unseen spirits before meals. Scholars still argue whether these rituals were spiritual, practical, or simply human attempts to bring order to uncertainty. You wander closer to the communal fire, feeling its warmth tugging you from the slight chill of early evening. Smoke curls over your shoulder, carrying hints of herbs burned for scent or pest deterrence. The villagers gather here to share news, ideas, and small stories, and you feel the magnetic pull of connection. It strikes you as odd that even in the most primitive conditions, humans crave storytelling. Perhaps it's not just entertainment, it's preparation for life's unpredictabilities, a way to pass wisdom quietly from one generation to another. You pause to imagine a young mother teaching her child to recognize plants, to listen to the wind, to observe the sky. As night deepens, the village slows but never completely stops. Fires flicker behind mud walls, and distant laughter echoes faintly. You notice someone placing a tiny clay figure near the hearth, a simple token of protection, or perhaps a playful offering. Oddly, the villagers seem comfortable with these small rituals, though you can sense the tension between play and purpose, chaos and order. Scholars still argue whether early villages functioned primarily on strict social hierarchy or an informal web of mutual reliance. You float between these possibilities, appreciating the subtle complexity of their lives. The rhythm of village life carries you forward, drawing attention to the interplay between work and rest. Some adults stir cautiously at night, checking on animals or fire, while others sleep near embers that will not die. You sense a pulse beneath everything, a heartbeat connecting individuals, families, and entire communities to one another and to the land itself. And you recognize the odd detail. Occasional small gatherings take place under moonlight, where villagers share songs or rhythmic clapping, possibly the earliest public performances. Scholars still debate whether these gatherings were primarily social, religious, or experimental play. You imagine participating silently, letting the cadence of drums and laughter sink deep into your bones, almost like a lullaby for the soul. You wander beyond the village edges, where cultivated fields meet untamed wilderness. Young saplings stand in neat rows, and furrows hint at the first attempts at organized agriculture. The land hums softly with potential. You pause to consider the leap humanity has made. From scattered hunters to coordinated planters, nurturing life in the soil rather than just scavenging it. Oddly, you notice tiny carved stones buried at the edge of a field, ritual markers or early currency. Scholars still argue whether these objects were symbolic, utilitarian, or simply playful experiments in human organization. You tilt your head, letting the quiet curiosity wash over you. The sky darkens fully now, revealing faint stars that would have guided early villagers in navigation, ritual, and storytelling. Fires flare briefly in the village as someone stirs logs, illuminating faces painted with soot and earth pigments. You wander slowly among these glowing silhouettes, appreciating the intimacy of light and shadow, the way it transforms ordinary life into something almost sacred. The villagers, quiet routines, their laughter, their shared knowledge, all seem suspended in a kind of eternal present. You feel yourself becoming part of this rhythm, drifting alongside the first human communities, sensing their joy, their fatigue, and their endless curiosity. The air is thick with potential and simplicity, a paradox that is both grounding and hypnotic. You pause near the tallest hut and notice tiny carvings along its beams, symbols of animals, stars, and abstract lines. Oddly, these etchings remind you that even the smallest details hold stories, and every pattern may carry secrets that scholars still argue about centuries later. As the night draws on, the village quiets further, leaving only gentle whispers of life, the soft padding of animal paws, the creak of wooden doors, the faint crackle of dying embers. You let your gaze linger on these small movements, imagining a world where survival, creation, and storytelling blend seamlessly. You sense the first threads of history weaving themselves quietly into the earth beneath your feet. By the time your eyes feel heavy, the village seems to embrace you like an old friend. Each hut, each child's laugh, each ritual stone feels intimate and alive. You linger in the lull between action and rest, imagining the pulse of life here continuing long after your imagined visit ends. And as you drift closer to dream, you realize the simplicity of early villages carries a profound serenity, one you can carry with you into the next stage of history. You wander next to landscapes shaped by rivers that no longer exist, where fertile plains once carried life as surely as your heartbeat carries you forward. The water's absence is almost eerie, leaving behind dry channels, cracked earth, and ghostly impressions of civilizations that depended on its flow. You probably won't survive the haunting beauty of these vanished waterways without pausing to marvel at what once was. And you do, letting your imagination fill the void with bustling life and vibrant culture. Along the former riverbanks, you imagine people building simple boats, learning to read the currents and tides, fishing, trading, and irrigating the land. Scholars still argue whether the settlements lining these waterways were planned strategically or grew organically over generations. Tiny fragments of pottery glint in the sunlight, half buried in sediment. Oddly, some pieces have intricate patterns depicting fish, birds, and abstract waves, a testament to early artistic expression and perhaps even symbolic communication. You bend down and let your fingers trace the faint grooves, imagining the hands that made them and the world they touched. You follow the faint path where the river once curved, noticing small terraces carved into the land for farming. The ingenuity here is subtle but remarkable, humans adapting to a flowing, changing environment. Crops are arranged in neat plots, soil enriched by seasonal flooding that no longer comes. Scholars still debate how these civilizations responded to shifting water levels, whether through ritual offerings to river gods, clever engineering, or migration to new areas. You pause to picture a farmer kneeling, running fingers through the soil while whispering words meant to coax life from the ground, perhaps unaware that centuries later, someone like you will wonder about these small, intimate gestures. Birds wheel overhead in the clear sky, and you notice a strangely decorative fence along one field, made from reeds and carved bones. Oddly, some of these carvings seem almost playful, depicting human and animal faces in exaggerated forms. You imagine children laughing as they imitate the faces, making a private performance just for themselves. Life along these vanished rivers had a rhythm, and it's a rhythm you now feel coursing through your own chest. You move toward the dry riverbed, imagining the currents that once carried canoes laden with goods, messages, and dreams. You almost hear the faint sound of water lapping at the banks, mingling with distant human voices shouting over trade and work. Scholars still argue whether these rivers were central to early civilizations, spiritual lives, or primarily practical resources. Maybe they were both, a duality that seems familiar even today. The water is gone, yet the memory of it persists, etched into soil, stone, and the quiet imagination of anyone who wanders here. Small mounds rise along the banks, possibly burial sites or ceremonial spaces. You notice odd markings on a flat stone at the top of one mound, lines, spirals, perhaps a map of the river as it once wound across the land. The precision is remarkable, and you feel the subtle thrill of connecting with a mind that existed thousands of years ago. Scholars still debate the purpose of such mounds. Were they territorial markers, sacred places, or simple commemorations? You tilt your head, letting the ambiguity settle, because part of the magic here is not knowing definitively. The wind carries faint scents of wildflowers and drying earth. You notice a small cluster of reeds swaying rhythmically along the river's ghost path, almost like a silent chorus accompanying your wandering. Oddly, among them lie remnants of fish traps and netting tools, hinting at forgotten ingenuity. You imagine an early fisherman returning home, proud of a catch that sustains family and community, unaware that their humble labor will echo in your curiosity centuries later. You trace further, encountering what could be the ruins of an ancient dock or landing place, now cracked and partially buried. It's easy to imagine traders unloading wares from distant lands, exchanging grain, pottery, and stories. The odd detail of a tiny carved figurine left behind sparks your curiosity. Was it a lucky charm, a token of thanks, or a playful offering to unseen river spirits? Scholars still argue whether these small artifacts were religious or recreational. You smile, letting the ambiguity settle like dust along the riverbed. The horizon shifts as you move deeper into the dry channels, where the sun illuminates layers of sediment revealing centuries of human activity. Footprints, pottery shards, and small stone tools peek through the soil. You feel a strange intimacy with those who walked these paths long before you, as if their lives are whispering directly into your imagination. The landscape is quiet now, but the ghosts of movement, trade, laughter, and ritual linger like a soft hum beneath the sun. As evening approaches, you notice the sky deepening into a spectrum of orange and purple. You imagine ancient humans gazing at this very sky, the reflection on the water they once knew. Oddly, there may have been early festivals celebrating the river's seasonal bounty, dances to coax it to return, or songs lamenting its disappearance. Scholars still debate how humans psychologically and spiritually adapted to the disappearance of such essential natural features. You feel the weight of their creativity, resilience, and longing, and let it mingle with your own sense of wonder. You pause at a cracked, dried-up channel, letting the silence settle. The landscape feels suspended between memory and oblivion, yet it hums with quiet life. You notice faint impressions of reeds, shells, and perhaps footprints of children playing centuries ago. The oddity of imagining their games strikes you as comforting. They were human, curious, playful, and full of the same longing for connection that you carry today. Night falls fully, and you trace your way back along the vanished river. Stars twinkle overhead, mirrored in the imagined water flowing below. You feel a strange serenity, knowing that even vanished rivers leave their mark, not just on the land, but on human imagination. Your mind floats gently between epochs, catching glimpses of lives intertwined with water, earth, and each other. You finally settle along the dry riverbed, letting the soft night wind brush your cheeks. The rhythm of vanished civilizations blends seamlessly with your own breath, grounding you while also lifting you. You sense the pulse of human resilience, creativity, and memory, and feel the journey deepening, preparing you for the next chapter of hidden histories that wait just ahead. You step carefully onto shifting sands, where stone ruins rise like memories from a desert long forgotten. The wind brushes past you, carrying faint traces of what once was, crumbled walls, half-buried statues, and the delicate whisper of stories lost to time. You probably won't survive the eerie beauty of this desert archaeology without feeling both awe and a touch of disquiet. Each grain beneath your feet seems to hum with centuries of forgotten life. The landscape is a patchwork of ruins and dunes. You wander past toppled columns and scattered stone blocks, imagining the hands that carved them, the sweat that etched these monuments into permanence. Oddly, some stones bear strange markings that resemble both animals and abstract human shapes, like an art experiment caught in stone. Scholars still argue whether these carvings were symbolic, religious, or merely decorative, a mystery that tickles your curiosity and makes the desert feel alive with whispers. You pause near a partially buried doorway, peering into the shadowed interior. The air inside smells faintly of earth and resin, as if the building had been abandoned yesterday rather than centuries ago. You imagine children playing here, their laughter echoing against stone walls, completely unaware that the desert will one day swallow their home. Oddly, small fragments of colored tiles catch the sunlight, hinting at aesthetic sensibilities far older than you'd expect. Scholars still debate the social structures of these desert civilizations, whether power was centralized in a single ruler, or spread among councils and clans. The wind moves through the ruins like a storyteller, carrying the faint sounds of the past. You imagine merchants and artisans, soldiers and scribes, each moving through narrow corridors and open courtyards. The oddity of desert life is evident. Water scarcity shaped everything from architecture to social rituals. You notice small basins carved into stone floors, likely for collecting rare rainfall, and wonder how people reconciled survival with art, culture, and play. Scholars still argue whether these societies relied more on ingenuity or divine guidance to thrive in such harsh conditions. As the sun shifts, shadows stretch long across the sand, creating the illusion that statues and pillars are moving, slowly stalking the desert as eternal guardians. Oddly, some statues appear deliberately whimsical, faces contorted into exaggerated expressions, perhaps meant to ward off spirits or amuse onlookers. You pause to imagine the sculpture's intent, wondering if humor was as important as reverence even in such austere settings. The desert holds both grandeur and intimacy, a delicate balance you feel with every step. You wander to the edge of a crumbling plaza, where faded mosaics hint at ceremonies once held under open skies. You notice tiny indentations along the tiles, almost as if children pressed their fingers there centuries ago, leaving a trace of joy or curiosity. Scholars still debate the purpose of such open spaces, gathering spots for rituals, marketplaces, or perhaps just communal centers for conversation and social play. You let your imagination fill the gaps, picturing people moving rhythmically, whispering incantations, or laughing quietly in moments of respite. Among the ruins, small artifacts peek from beneath the sand, broken pottery, tools, and ornaments. Oddly, one tiny figurine depicts an animal with exaggerated features, suggesting humor, storytelling, or perhaps a myth lost to time. You pick it up lightly in your mind's eye, feeling a connection across millennia. The desert's quiet amplifies every sensation. The crunch of sand beneath your feet, the soft whistle of wind through cracks, the faint resonance of ancient voices. Scholars still argue whether these artifacts were everyday objects or ceremonial tokens, their purpose forever teasing your curiosity. You find a partially intact wall adorned with faint murals. The colors are muted but suggest scenes of dance, feasting, and possibly ritual. Oddly, the figures, proportions are deliberately inconsistent, perhaps emphasizing expression over realism. You linger, imagining the people who created this art. Their laughter, their frustrations, their quiet moments of contemplation. Scholars still debate whether desert murals served primarily religious, educational, or decorative purposes. You sense that the answer may be all of the above. As the sun dips toward the horizon, the desert transforms into a palette of warm oranges, soft purples, and muted golds. Shadows lengthen, and the air cools, carrying a faint whisper of night-blooming flowers. Oddly, you notice tiny fossils embedded in rocks, hinting at a time when this desert may have been lush and alive, a landscape dramatically transformed by climate and time. Scholars still argue about the pace and causes of these environmental shifts, but their evidence paints a picture of resilience, adaptation, and human ingenuity. You wander among archways and crumbled staircases, sensing the subtle geometry that ancient architects used to guide both movement and attention. Oddly, some doorways seem intentionally narrow or curved, perhaps to control airflow, ritual movement, or even just to amuse those navigating the spaces. You pause, letting the imagination of the builders envelop you, appreciating the blend of functionality, aesthetics, and human whimsy. Night arrives fully, and the desert cools, revealing stars that feel impossibly close. You notice a faint line of dunes in the distance, each ridge a gentle whisper of what the wind has shaped over centuries. Oddly, you detect faint impressions of footsteps, almost like ghosts walking parallel to your own journey. Scholars still debate whether desert civilizations vanished due to drought, migration, or conquest. You feel a quiet empathy for those who lived, laughed, and created here, leaving only traces in sand and memory. As you settle among the ruins, the desert feels both empty and full, empty of modern civilization, full of history, artistry, and human presence. You notice a small alcove where someone once stored water. It's oddly intimate, a quiet reminder that survival and reflection coexisted even in harsh conditions. You imagine yourself lying here, letting the cool stone cradle you, feeling the slow passage of time hum beneath the stars. Your mind drifts gently with the desert wind. The ruins whisper their stories of creativity, survival, and fleeting joy. You sense that even as civilizations vanish, echoes of their existence persist, woven into the land, waiting for wandering souls like yours to hear them. You let the quiet pull you deeper into a calm awareness, readying yourself for the next chapter, where ancient island kingdoms rise and fall beneath the tides. You step lightly onto shores that hum with the memory of tides, where the ocean whispers secrets of civilizations long claimed by water. The salty breeze brushes against your skin, carrying faint traces of fish, seaweed, and the distant echo of human voices. You probably won't survive the hypnotic pull of these ancient island kingdoms without letting your mind drift with the waves, imagining bustling harbors now swallowed by time. The islands rise like green jewels from turquoise waters, their peaks dotted with terraces and small huts that once held thriving communities. Oddly, you notice that some settlements are perched precariously along cliffs, as if daring the ocean to reclaim them. Scholars still argue whether these locations were chosen for strategic defense, proximity to fishing grounds, or purely aesthetic reasons. You wander along narrow paths, imagining children darting between homes, carrying small baskets, their laughter mingling with the distant crash of waves. Fishermen cast their nets into sparkling inlets, pulling in fish, crustaceans, and perhaps even shells used for trade or decoration. You notice odd carvings on boats and docks, intricate swirls depicting sea creatures and celestial patterns. Scholars still debate whether these motifs were protective charms, artistic expression, or part of early navigation systems. You pause to imagine the hands that etched these designs, the same hands that paddled long distances, braved storms, and observed the rhythm of tides. The marketplaces hum with subtle energy. Even now, you can picture the exchange of goods. Dried fish for woven mats, shells for pottery, spices for simple cloth. Oddly, some items seem almost whimsical, tiny carved figurines of sea creatures, or oddly shaped stones traded as tokens of luck. Scholars still argue whether these small tokens held economic value or were purely symbolic. You let the hum of trade wash over you, feeling the pulse of human ingenuity and communal life. You follow a winding path to a ceremonial plaza overlooking the ocean. The stones are worn smooth by countless feet, and faint lines etched into the surface suggest rituals connected to tides, moon cycles, or even seasonal migration of fish. Oddly, small offerings, shells, bones, and tiny carvings linger in cracks and crevices, hints of devotion or superstition. Scholars still debate whether these rituals were primarily spiritual or social, but you sense both at play, intertwined with survival and celebration. From cliffside terraces, you observe gardens growing in terraced soil, where hardy plants thrive in limited space. Oddly, some of the gardens appear ornamental, more for beauty than utility, suggesting a sophisticated aesthetic sense. Scholars still argue about the extent to which these islanders practiced early forms of agriculture versus wild gathering. You imagine a gardener kneeling in the soil, whispering instructions to the plants as though coaxing them to grow, a gentle dialogue that has persisted across centuries. The wind carries stories from distant islands, connecting you to trade networks that crisscross the ocean. You notice the odd detail of tiny carved navigational markers, stones etched with wave patterns and star alignments. Scholars still debate whether these markers guided daily fishing trips or long-distance voyages. You imagine a lone navigator tracing constellations across the night sky, the ocean stretching endlessly before them, feeling both exhilaration and profound vulnerability. You wander along a deserted shoreline, where shells and coral fragments scatter the sand. Oddly, small footprints suggest children or animals moving playfully, unaware of the vastness of the world. Scholars still argue about the social structures of island kingdoms, whether matriarchal councils, hereditary chiefs, or communal elders held sway. You pause to consider how life on these islands balanced independence with interdependence, isolation with connection, survival with ritual. As day fades into evening, you witness the glow of fires along the coast, illuminating wooden dwellings and ceremonial spaces. Oddly, you notice tiny carvings of ocean waves in the hearthstones, perhaps reminders of the ever-present sea. Scholars still debate the symbolic meaning of such motifs. Were they protective, aesthetic, or narrative? You let the quiet warmth of fire and human ingenuity seep into your senses, a gentle lullaby of resilience and creativity. The tide rises slowly, brushing against stone foundations and cliffside homes. You notice the odd detail of small canals dug to guide water, demonstrating clever engineering and deep environmental awareness. Scholars still argue whether these systems were primarily practical, ceremonial, or a combination of both. You imagine the satisfaction of a community managing water so precisely, a delicate balance between human endeavor and natural force. You trace the remnants of ancient docks, imagining sailors loading goods, exchanging greetings, and setting off for distant shores. Oddly, you notice tiny clay figurines left behind, each depicting marine life in playful or exaggerated forms. Scholars still debate the extent to which myth and daily life intertwined in these communities, but you sense an inseparable connection between the ordinary and the sacred. As night deepens, the ocean's voice becomes a gentle lull, a rhythm that merges with your own breath. You notice faint traces of ancient songs carried on the wind, perhaps sung to honor sea gods, mark milestones, or simply pass the time. Oddly, some of these songs may have been improvised by children, blending play with ritual. Scholars still argue about the origins and purposes of such melodies, but their haunting beauty persists, lingering in the imagined spaces you now occupy. You settle on a soft, sandy incline overlooking the water, letting the gentle sway of waves calm your thoughts. The stars above mirror the ocean below, a reflection of continuity and mystery. Oddly, you notice faint outlines of submersed structures beneath the water's surface, hinting at islands that may have been swallowed by rising seas. Scholars still debate the causes of these disappearances, tectonic shifts, climate change, or gradual erosion, but the stories remain, whispering beneath the waves. Your mind drifts with the rhythm of tides and time, tracing pathways of trade, ritual, and survival. The island kingdoms, though mostly vanished, pulse softly in memory, leaving you with a sense of wonder, connection, and quiet reverence. You breathe deeply, letting the ocean's whisper guide you gently into the next chapter, where forests reclaim empires with slow, unstoppable patience. You step into the dense embrace of forests that have swallowed entire empires, where sunlight filters through thick canopies in dancing patterns, and the air is heavy with the scent of moss, damp wood, and decay. You probably won't survive the hypnotic pull of this green labyrinth without surrendering to its quiet, ancient pulse. Every step you take is cushioned by fallen leaves, soft and spongy, while vines and roots weave around you like the fingers of a sleeping giant. The forest is alive with sound, though it's subtle. Distant bird calls, the soft rustle of small creatures, the occasional crack of a branch under weight you can't see. Oddly, you notice tiny carvings on tree trunks, some no larger than your palm, spirals, symbols, perhaps messages left by forest-dwelling civilizations long forgotten. Scholars still argue whether these marks were practical guides, spiritual reminders, or early forms of coded communication. You trace one with your finger, imagining the hand that pressed it centuries ago. You wander past ruins overtaken by roots and creepers. Stone walls crumble under the pressure of time, and columns are draped in thick moss. Oddly, some walls have faint traces of brightly colored pigments, evidence of murals depicting animals, deities, or abstract shapes. Scholars still debate whether these murals were primarily ceremonial, educational, or decorative. You pause, letting your imagination fill in the gaps, picturing communities bustling amidst the green, their voices blending with the wind and rustling leaves. Small clearings reveal terraces and platforms, perhaps for dwellings or ritual spaces. Oddly, you notice miniature statues tucked into the undergrowth, faces worn smooth by centuries of rain and wind, yet still somehow expressive. Scholars still argue whether these figures represented ancestors, spirits, or playful charms meant to amuse or protect. You kneel briefly in reverence, imagining the rituals that might have taken place here, quiet offerings, dances, or even impromptu games. The canopy overhead creates a patchwork of shadow and light, shifting as clouds move across the sky. Oddly, you spot small structures built directly into the trunks of massive trees, platforms, ladders, and ladders twisted into spiral stairways. Scholars still debate whether these were defensive perches, dwellings, or observation points. You imagine climbing one, feeling the texture of bark under your hands, the thrill of elevation and concealment blending with the smell of earth and leaves. You wander toward a stream cutting through the forest floor, its waters dark but clear. Oddly, small stones along its banks are etched with intricate patterns, lines, spirals, animal forms, suggesting ritual or playful artistry. Scholars still argue whether the stream itself held spiritual significance or was primarily practical. You crouch by the water, letting your hand disturb the surface, ripples echoing outward like centuries of stories carried on the current. As the forest deepens, you notice enormous root systems twisting like serpents, their sheer size hinting at centuries of quiet growth. Oddly, hollow spaces among the roots seem deliberately shaped, as if humans once carved hiding spots or storage nooks within them. Scholars still debate whether these were defensive, domestic, or ceremonial. You step carefully, respecting both the power of nature and the ingenuity of those who once lived among it. Faint pathways hint at trade or travel routes connecting distant forest settlements. Oddly, small figurines and carved tokens are left along the trails, possibly markers, messages, or playful reminders of human presence. Scholars still argue about the social and economic organization of forest civilizations, whether they were tightly controlled hierarchies or fluid, interdependent networks. You follow the path, feeling the hum of history beneath your feet, a subtle reminder that even the densest forest cannot entirely erase human impact. Birds and insects create a gentle symphony, overlaid by the faint rustle of leaves. You notice odd artifacts. Small ceramic pieces painted with strange geometric designs, perhaps toys, ritual items, or teaching tools. Scholars still debate their exact purpose, but the mystery adds depth and intimacy to your wandering. You imagine a child discovering one of these pieces centuries ago, the thrill of a hidden secret binding them to future wanderers like you. You come across a partially collapsed temple, its stone carvings almost entirely overtaken by vines and moss. Oddly, some of the carvings are whimsical, faces of animals with exaggerated features, human-animal hybrids, playful or mischievous in intent. Scholars still argue whether humor held spiritual significance in these civilizations. You wander slowly through the shadowed corridors, listening to the forest's gentle chorus, feeling both awe and a comforting intimacy. As dusk approaches, sunlight filters in thinner beams, and the forest glows in golden hues. You notice faint impressions of ceremonial platforms, small fire pits, and stone seats tucked into the mossy undergrowth. Oddly, scattered leaves sometimes form natural patterns, echoing designs carved by humans centuries ago. Scholars still debate whether such interactions between humans and forest were intentional or purely coincidental. You pause, allowing the quiet majesty of coexistence to settle into your senses. Night begins to descend, and the forest transforms into a quiet cathedral. Fireflies blink intermittently, casting gentle glimmers on moss-covered ruins. Oddly, you notice a faint rhythmic tapping somewhere distant, perhaps a bird, a primate, or even a hidden human artifact still resonating under the forest canopy. Scholars still argue about the interplay of nature and civilization in these spaces. You take a deep breath, letting the rich, damp scent fill your lungs, and feel the forest's slow heartbeat align with your own. You wander to a small clearing where a pool reflects the starry sky. Oddly, small offerings, perhaps seeds, shells, or carvings, float on the surface, hinting at ritual or play. Scholars still debate the symbolic meaning of water in forest cultures, sustenance, spirituality, or both. You sit quietly, feeling the gentle pull of the forest's memory, the hum of human and natural life interwoven. Finally, as you recline on a bed of moss, the canopy above casting a protective shadow, you feel enveloped by the persistence of life, both human and natural. The forest has reclaimed what empires once held, yet the echoes remain, subtle, patient, and whispering to anyone willing to wander slowly enough to notice. You inhale deeply, letting the serene pulse of the forest settle into your mind, preparing you for the next journey across skies, stars, and ancient observation points. You ascend a gentle hill, where the ruins of ancient observatories perch like sentinels watching the passage of stars. The sky is a vast canvas, streaked with the fading colors of sunset, and you probably won't survive the dizzying majesty of this celestial theater without tilting your head back and surrendering to wonder. The air carries the scent of earth and stone warmed by the sun, mingling with the faint tang of distant fires. You wander among circular stone platforms, each etched with precise alignments pointing toward the horizon, the rising sun, or specific constellations. Oddly, some markings seem almost playful, spirals and dots that don't align with practical observation, as if the ancient astronomers had a sense of humor or curiosity beyond calculation. Scholars still argue whether these sites served purely as observatories, ceremonial centers, or both. You trace the grooves with your fingertips, imagining the astronomers adjusting primitive sighting tools, marking the passage of time, and recording celestial events with awe and meticulous care. High above the surrounding landscape, the platforms offer a breathtaking view of valleys, rivers, and distant forests. Oddly, scattered stones along the edges are carved with animal motifs, owls, serpents, and other creatures that may have symbolized wisdom, vigilance, or mythic guardianship. Scholars still debate whether these carvings were symbolic, educational, or decorative, but you sense a profound connection between earth and sky, utility and art. You pause to breathe in the panorama, feeling both small and intimately linked to the vast cycles of time and space. You notice remnants of ladders and scaffolding, suggesting that ancient engineers climbed precarious heights to align markers precisely. Oddly, some steps are deliberately uneven, perhaps to slow the observer or create moments of reflection. Scholars still argue whether these sites were primarily scientific, religious, or multifunctional. You climb a remaining stone staircase carefully, feeling the cool surface under your palms, and imagine the thrill of witnessing the sun rise exactly where the builders intended centuries ago. At the summit, a circular platform remains remarkably intact. You spot small depressions carved into the stone, perhaps used to hold water, sand, or reflective surfaces for tracking celestial bodies. Oddly, some depressions are arranged in patterns resembling star maps that no longer match modern constellations, suggesting either observational error or cultural interpretations of the sky. Scholars still debate the accuracy and intent of these ancient mappings, and you allow yourself to be captivated by the possibility of a different cosmic perspective. You wander to a faintly carved wall where lines, dots, and spiral patterns suggest a coded system of recording observations. Oddly, some symbols seem almost whimsical, like doodles over serious work, hinting at playfulness amid precision. Scholars still argue whether these markings were utilitarian calendars, religious symbols, or educational tools for apprentices. You imagine an ancient scholar leaning over these lines, explaining the stars to wide-eyed students, blending science and storytelling effortlessly. The wind sweeps across the hilltop, carrying the soft scent of distant flowers and cooling stone. Oddly, you notice tiny piles of stones left in patterns across the platforms, perhaps offerings, markers, or simply creative experiments. Scholars still debate their purpose, but each small pile tells a story of human interaction, curiosity, and ritual. You pause, letting your fingers brush over one pile, feeling a silent connection to someone who lived long before you. As dusk deepens, the sky transforms into deep indigo, and stars begin to twinkle faintly. Oddly, you spot faint carvings of mythical creatures aligned with the cardinal points, dragons, serpents, or birds, perhaps meant to watch over the heavens. Scholars still argue whether these figures were protective, educational, or decorative, but you sense their intent, bridging human imagination with the infinite sky. You follow the curve of a stone platform leading toward a small circular chamber. Inside, faint engravings suggest rituals tied to solstices, equinoxes, or other celestial phenomena. Oddly, small depressions at the base may have held offerings, stones, seeds, or miniature figurines, blending observation with devotion. Scholars still debate whether these observatories doubled as ceremonial spaces or were primarily scientific laboratories. You linger, imagining priests, astronomers, and children all interacting here, their lives intertwined with the cosmos above. You notice faint star charts etched into flat stones scattered around the platform, some marked with precise lunar cycles, others with patterns that are harder to interpret. Oddly, playful carvings, tiny faces or animals, intermingle with accurate astronomical lines, reminding you that curiosity and creativity often coexist. Scholars still argue about the sophistication of these star charts and whether they influenced agricultural, religious, or navigational practices. You feel the thrill of tracing these lines with your imagination, bridging the gap between ancient minds and your own. The night deepens, and the wind whispers through the stone columns. Oddly, you detect faint echoes of chants or counting rhythms, perhaps carried by performers or observers long gone. Scholars still debate whether sound played a role in astronomical observation, guiding timing, or enhancing ceremonial experience. You lie back on the cool stone, letting the gentle night air carry these possibilities into your mind. You gaze at the stars, mirrored faintly in small water-filled depressions, imagining early astronomers watching reflected skies while marking celestial events. Oddly, the reflections sometimes distort constellations, blending reality with perception, hinting at the imaginative lens through which humans viewed the universe. Scholars still argue about whether this was intentional experimentation or accidental observation. You inhale deeply, letting the silent majesty of the night sky pulse through you, a rhythm both ancient and timeless. Finally, as you recline, the hilltop feels like a bridge between Earth and cosmos. The whisper of wind, the faint sparkle of stars, and the echoes of human ingenuity wrap around you like a soft blanket. You feel yourself connected not just to these observatories, but to the curiosity, playfulness, and wonder that has propelled human exploration of the heavens for millennia. You close your eyes, letting the quiet hum of stars and stone guide you into the next chapter, where deserts meet rivers once more, carrying stories of migration, conquest, and survival. You descend from the high observatories, following a winding trail that leads you back to river valleys now stretching languidly beneath the twilight. The air cools, carrying the scent of damp earth and flowering reeds, and you probably won't survive the subtle pull of nostalgia this evokes without pausing to let your mind float along the water's imagined currents. Shadows stretch across the terrain, blending stone, soil, and water into a seamless memory of human habitation. The riverbanks are dotted with remnants of settlements, half-sunken platforms, worn steps, and small pottery shards glinting faintly in the evening light. Oddly, you notice tiny footprints pressed into dried mud, far too small for adults, hinting at children whose games were as transient as the river's meandering flow. Scholars still argue whether these early riverside settlements were temporary trading hubs or permanent homes. You follow the curves of the river, imagining families, merchants, and travelers moving with purpose, weaving their lives into the water's rhythm. You pause beside a faintly carved stone, its surface etched with concentric circles and lines resembling early maps. Oddly, some carvings depict animals with exaggerated features, hinting at storytelling or symbolic meaning beyond mere navigation. Scholars still debate whether these maps were practical tools for travel, ceremonial representations, or something in between. You trace your fingers lightly along the grooves, feeling a pulse of connection to the ancient hands that created them. The river itself seems quieter than you imagine it once was, yet life clings stubbornly to its banks. Tiny fish leap, dragonflies skim the surface, and reeds sway in the evening breeze. Oddly, you notice miniature clay figurines nestled in the mud, perhaps left as offerings, playful toys, or small tokens of gratitude. Scholars still argue whether such artifacts were primarily religious or cultural markers. You kneel briefly to examine them, sensing the quiet intimacy of daily life preserved in these tiny creations. You follow the river toward a collapsed dock, imagining boats once laden with goods, grains, pottery, woven mats, and shells. Oddly, some planks are carved with abstract patterns resembling waves and stars, suggesting a playful or symbolic link between human activity and natural forces. Scholars still debate whether these carvings were practical for orientation or purely decorative. You picture sailors guiding their vessels with knowledge of tides and constellations, merging skill with ritual in the most natural way. Across the valley, terraces carved into the soil indicate sophisticated agriculture, each plot carefully shaped to harness the river's seasonal flows. Oddly, some terraces bear small, carved stones depicting animals or faces, as though the farmers infused their work with whimsy or protective symbolism. Scholars still argue about the extent of technological innovation in these ancient agricultural systems. You pause to imagine a farmer kneeling, fingers brushing the soil while murmuring words of encouragement or blessing, a delicate human connection to the land. Small structures peek through vegetation along the river, huts, storage spaces, and communal areas. Oddly, you notice faint traces of colorful pigment on some walls, hinting at murals or symbolic decorations long faded. Scholars still debate whether riverside art was functional, spiritual, or social, but the evidence evokes a living, breathing culture. You wander slowly, imagining the sounds of conversation, laughter, and daily labor carried across the water. You approach a shallow channel where the river once split into smaller tributaries, now reduced to faint depressions lined with reeds. Oddly, you spot tiny fish traps made from woven reeds, their design surprisingly sophisticated. Scholars still argue whether these tools were shared communally or individualized. You imagine children learning the craft from elders, playful instruction merging with practical necessity, a subtle continuity of knowledge across generations. The sun dips below distant hills, and the valley glows with the last golden light. Oddly, you notice stones arranged in patterns along the riverbank, perhaps used as markers, ceremonial symbols, or playful creations left by children. Scholars still debate the significance of such arrangements, yet their quiet presence evokes a sense of intimacy, a link between past and present. You breathe deeply, feeling the pulse of both human life and natural rhythm in sync. You trace your way to a partially intact settlement platform, imagining families gathering to share stories, prepare food, and watch the rivers flow. Oddly, some stones have carvings of exaggerated human or animal faces, blending humor with daily life. Scholars still argue whether these were meant as protective charms, artistic expression, or simple amusement. You sit on a flat stone, letting your senses absorb the mingling of history, nature, and imagination. The river whispers faintly as night falls, the sound mingling with distant bird calls and rustling reeds. Oddly, you notice tiny offerings tucked among rocks, a shell here, a carved stone there, hinting at small acts of devotion or playful ritual. Scholars still debate the symbolic significance of these items. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the gentle murmur of water and the faint pulse of human presence carry you deeper into contemplation. Stars emerge overhead, reflected in small pools along the river's edge. Oddly, you see faint traces of patterns in the water that mimic ancient carvings on nearby stones, suggesting a deliberate interplay between landscape and culture. Scholars still argue about the intent behind these arrangements, but their subtle beauty resonates effortlessly with your imagination. You lie back on soft grass, letting the river's quiet flow sync with your own breathing, a rhythm of continuity, memory, and gentle wonder. Finally, you rest beside the riverbank, enveloped in the soft murmur of water and the faint glow of distant stars. Oddly, you feel a sense of kinship with the countless hands and minds that shaped this landscape, leaving whispers of life in stone, mud, and imagination. Scholars still debate much, yet the pulse of civilization lingers, waiting for wanderers like you to notice, absorb, and drift gently forward. You climb from the river valley into rolling plains, where traces of ancient battlefields and nomadic settlements hint at societies constantly on the move. The wind sweeps across tall grasses, carrying faint echoes of hoofbeats, shouting, and the clash of metal, though you probably won't survive imagining these scenes without a shiver of awe and an unspoken respect for those who lived in such volatile lands. The earth beneath your feet hums with layered histories, each step sinking into a tapestry of migration, conflict, and survival. Scattered across the plains, you notice low mounds and stone circles, remnants of burial sites and ceremonial grounds. Oddly, some stones are engraved with abstract human forms, elongated limbs, exaggerated eyes, suggesting symbolic meaning, humor, or storytelling. Scholars still argue whether these sites were primarily sacred, commemorative, or markers of territorial boundaries. You kneel beside one, tracing the grooves with a gentle touch, imagining the ritual that accompanied its creation, and the grief or celebration it marked. You wander along faint trails once trodden by herders and traders. Oddly, small, whimsical figurines are left along paths, miniature animals, faces, or objects carved in wood or stone, hinting at playful rituals or protective charms. Scholars still debate whether such markers were spiritual guides, reminders, or childlike creativity left to amuse travelers. You let your imagination fill in the gaps, picturing generations of nomads passing by, each leaving small, personal traces on the vast plains. The plains open into gentle valleys dotted with fortified settlements. You imagine wooden palisades, watchtowers, and communal halls bustling with life. Oddly, some fortifications feature carved symbols of animals with exaggerated expressions, perhaps meant to intimidate or amuse. Scholars still argue about the degree of social centralization in these communities, whether power rested with single rulers, councils, or shifting coalitions. You wander through imagined streets, hearing the faint cadence of footsteps, livestock calls, and children's laughter mingling with the wind. You approach shallow depressions once used for gathering water or marking grazing boundaries. Oddly, some contain small stone arrangements resembling constellations or abstract patterns. Scholars still debate whether these were practical guides, spiritual markers, or simple expressions of artistic whimsy. You crouch to inspect them, tracing the stones with your fingers and imagining the countless human interactions that shape these humble yet meaningful landscapes. The wind rustles the tall grasses, carrying whispers of long-forgotten rituals and tribal councils. Oddly, some grasses seem deliberately flattened in circles or patterns, suggesting games, ceremonies, or playful communication. Scholars still argue whether these formations were practical, ritualistic, or purely expressive. You step lightly through them, feeling a gentle resonance between your own presence and the centuries of life that preceded you. You notice faint remains of longhouses, where timber frames have rotted but the outlines remain. Oddly, small carvings survive on posts, spiral designs, faces, or animal motifs, hinting at both spiritual significance and playful artistry. Scholars still debate the primary function of these structures, whether residential, communal, or ritual. You imagine families gathered inside, the warm glow of fires flickering, storytelling blending with lessons of survival, the mundane intertwined with the sacred. Along the plains, you stumble upon rock art etched into flat stones or cliff faces. Oddly, some depict creatures that never existed, or perhaps never existed outside imagination, blending real and fantastical elements. Scholars still argue whether such depictions were mythic storytelling, religious symbolism, or playful exaggeration. You linger, envisioning a community passing down legends, each generation embellishing and reshaping them in rhythm with oral tradition. Evening descends slowly, painting the sky in muted oranges and purples. Oddly, you notice faint trails of smoke rising from distant hearths, suggesting survivors of long-vanished civilizations maintaining life, ritual, or simple warmth. Scholars still debate whether these plains were primarily nomadic, semi-permanent, or seasonal settlements. You inhale the cool air, letting the imagined life of these plains drift through your senses, a gentle hum of endurance and adaptation. You follow a faint ridge where remnants of watchtowers once stood. Oddly, small carvings of eyes or abstract faces are etched into the stones, perhaps to watch over the landscape, guard against spirits, or simply amuse passers-by. Scholars still argue whether these markings were protective, communicative, or decorative. You pause, letting the soft wind carry the imagined echoes of sentinels, traders, and children playing beneath the vast sky. Grasslands stretch endlessly toward the horizon, dotted with small ruins and ceremonial mounds. Oddly, you notice faint traces of fire pits arranged in geometric patterns, perhaps for ritual, signaling, or communal gatherings. Scholars still debate the intended purpose, but their presence hints at deliberate human engagement with the vast openness. You sit momentarily, letting the gentle sway of grasses, the fading warmth of sunset, and the subtle pulse of history settle into your mind. Stars begin to emerge overhead, faint but persistent. Oddly, some rock arrangements on the ground echo the constellations, suggesting deliberate observation and symbolic alignment. Scholars still argue whether this practice was primarily navigational, ceremonial, or artistic. You lie back on a small mound, letting the quiet of the plains, the whispers of past travelers, and the twinkling sky guide your thoughts, feeling both small and intimately connected. Finally, as night envelopes the plains, you feel a gentle stillness, a resonance between the earth, sky, and human legacy scattered across this expanse. Oddly, tiny nocturnal creatures stir among the grasses, their movements a quiet counterpoint to imagined past lives. Scholars still debate the social and cultural intricacies of these nomadic plains, but you sense their rhythm, persistence, and quiet joy, letting it settle gently into your awareness, readying you for the next journey into mountainous territories where stone and sky intertwine. You climb into the jagged embrace of mountains, where peaks pierce the sky and valleys carve themselves into shadowed mystery. The air is thinner here, crisp with scent of pine and mineral-rich soil, and you probably won't survive the awe without letting your senses stretch wide, drinking in the expanse of stone, cloud, and sky. Each step feels deliberate, your boots sinking slightly into loose gravel while distant echoes remind you that humans have traversed these heights for millennia. You wander along narrow ledges, where terraces cling precariously to cliffsides. Oddly, some terraces contain small stone circles whose purpose is obscure, perhaps ritualistic, defensive, or experimental. Scholars still argue whether these cliffside constructions were primarily for habitation, ceremonial use, or early forms of terraced agriculture. You run your fingers along the edges, imagining children chasing one another, elders tending crops, and warriors scanning the horizon for signs of danger. High up, you encounter ruins of stone dwellings, their walls remarkably resilient against time and weather. Oddly, some stones are carved with tiny faces, animals, or abstract swirls, perhaps intended to bring humor or protection. Scholars still debate the extent to which symbolism influenced daily mountain architecture versus practical necessity. You lean against a wall, feeling its cool solidity, picturing families clustered inside against bitter winds, fires flickering, and life persevering. Narrow mountain passes reveal traces of trade routes, marked by stacked stones and subtle carvings. Oddly, some carvings are whimsical, spirals, dots, and small creatures that seem playful in contrast to the rugged environment. Scholars still argue whether these routes were primarily economic corridors, pilgrimage paths, or cultural connectors. You imagine travelers carrying goods, salt, herbs, textiles, and curiosities, pausing to leave small tokens for guidance or amusement. You pause at a high plateau, where faint markings align with peaks, rivers, and stars. Oddly, some stones appear deliberately polished in geometric patterns, reflecting sunlight in playful flashes. Scholars still debate whether such alignments were used for calendrical calculations, religious ceremonies, or both. You trace the polished edges with your hands, sensing the careful observation and reverence that went into these designs. The wind whistles through narrow passes, carrying scents of pine resin, damp stone, and distant fires. Oddly, tiny offerings, bits of cloth, carved figurines, or stones, litter niches and ledges, hinting at human connection with the mountain spirit. Scholars still argue whether these were protective gestures, devotional acts, or personal expressions. You crouch to examine them, feeling a quiet intimacy with those who left them centuries ago. You encounter small terraces carved into rock faces, where hardy plants once thrived. Oddly, some terraces include decorative stones or carvings that seem more artistic than functional, hinting at aesthetic considerations alongside subsistence. Scholars still debate the degree to which mountain societies balanced practicality and creativity. You pause, imagining a farmer kneeling to plant seeds, murmuring encouragement or offering silent thanks to unseen forces, blending survival and ritual. As sunlight wanes, you glimpse caves high on cliffs, their entrances faintly etched with abstract patterns and humanoid forms. Oddly, some designs are playful, animals with exaggerated limbs or faces, that seem to reflect storytelling or whimsy. Scholars still argue whether these caves were dwellings, sanctuaries, or ceremonial chambers. You imagine the faint crackle of firelight within, shadows dancing across stone walls as inhabitants whispered stories, counted stars, and passed down knowledge. Descending slightly, you find a small stone platform overlooking a valley. Oddly, scattered around are tiny carved figures of humans and animals, their expressions animated or humorous. Scholars still debate whether these objects were toys, ritual objects, or educational tools. You pick up one figure, feeling its smooth surface, and imagine a child centuries ago playing, learning, or honoring ancestors. You wander along a ridge where walls and terraces suggest communal living spaces. Oddly, small stones are arranged in abstract formations, their purpose elusive, perhaps markers, artistic expressions, or playful exercises. Scholars still argue whether these arrangements were symbolic, functional, or purely experimental. You lean against a remaining wall, listening to the wind swirl through the ridges, letting the faint echo of past lives mingle with your own presence. The mountains gradually darken, stars piercing the evening sky. Oddly, some rock formations align with celestial events, perhaps for ceremonial observation or seasonal tracking. Scholars still debate the precision and intent behind these alignments. But their presence evokes both ingenuity and reverence. You lie down on a flat rock, letting the cool mountain air carry the distant hum of rivers, forests, and plains, the interwoven pulse of human settlement and natural rhythm. Finally, you reach a quiet ledge overlooking a deep valley, feeling the immensity of both stone and sky. Oddly, Tiny wildflowers push through cracks in the rock, resilient against harsh conditions. Scholars still debate how humans adapted to such extreme environments, yet the interplay of survival, creativity, and observation is evident everywhere. You inhale deeply, letting the mountain's whisper settle into your mind, preparing for the journey ahead, where deserts, rivers, and the ingenuity of civilization await. You leave the high mountains behind, stepping into a vast desert where golden sands stretch endlessly, rippling like waves frozen in time. The sun is low, casting long shadows across dunes, and you probably won't survive the hypnotic, almost hallucinatory beauty of this arid expanse without feeling both humbled and awed. Each step sinks slightly into the warm grains, carrying echoes of travelers, caravans, and nomads who crossed these lands centuries ago. You follow faint tracks along a dune ridge, imagining camels and humans trudging under the relentless sun. Oddly, scattered among the sands are tiny fragments of pottery painted with geometric shapes or tiny animal figures, suggesting brief stops or personal offerings. Scholars still debate whether these artifacts were practical markers, ritual objects, or casual creations left behind. You kneel to pick up a shard, letting your fingers brush its edges, imagining the hands that shaped it in the heat of the desert. Oases appear as shimmering mirages at first, then solid patches of life, palm trees, reeds, and cool water glinting in the sun. Oddly, small carved stones lie around the pools, depicting eyes, spirals, or abstract patterns. Scholars still argue whether these were spiritual offerings, territorial markers, or playful artifacts. You kneel to drink from the pool's edge, feeling the refreshment of water and the subtle echo of countless desert wanderers. You wander past ruins half buried in shifting sands, stone walls, sunken courtyards, and faint foundations. Oddly, some stones bear whimsical carvings, faces with exaggerated expressions, animals dancing or interacting in ways that seem almost humorous. Scholars still debate whether desert art was primarily ceremonial, narrative, or decorative, yet its charm endures. You step lightly across the ruins, letting your imagination animate the fleeting lives that once thrived here. The desert wind stirs, lifting sand into gentle swirls that catch the sunlight. Oddly, you notice tiny stone arrangements forming abstract patterns, some mirroring distant constellations. Scholars still argue whether such arrangements were practical, symbolic, or artistic experiments. You pause, tracing the lines with your fingers, imagining generations observing the stars and desert landscapes, seeking guidance or storytelling inspiration. You spot faint caravan routes, marked by stacked stones, slight depressions, or occasional artifacts. Oddly, some markers are playful, with small carvings of animals, faces, or abstract designs. Scholars still debate whether these symbols served as guidance, territorial demarcation, or personal expression. You walk the paths slowly, imagining merchants, nomads, and travelers pausing to leave reminders for those who would follow. Dunes shift as the wind moves, revealing occasional stone platforms or remnants of desert settlements. Oddly, tiny painted fragments hint at rituals, celebrations, or even whimsical decorations meant to amuse passers-by. Scholars still argue about the social structure of these desert communities and the balance between survival, spirituality, and play. You step carefully, imagining evenings where families and travelers shared stories, laughter, and the quiet majesty of endless sands. Sunset colors the desert in deep oranges, reds, and purples. Oddly, you notice small depressions in the sand arranged in circular or spiral patterns, suggesting games, rituals, or symbolic observances. Scholars still debate the intent behind these patterns. You let your eyes wander across the dunes, sensing the rhythm of human life interwoven with the stark beauty of the desert. As night falls, the desert sky becomes an expansive canvas, stars glittering with an intensity unmatched elsewhere. Oddly, some ruins align with celestial events, marking solstices or equinoxes. Scholars still argue about the precision and purpose of these alignments, but the interplay between earth and sky is unmistakable. You lie down on a soft dune, letting the cool sand support you as constellations mirror the patterns etched by ancient hands. You approach a small sandstone shelter, where faint carvings of humans, animals, and abstract shapes hint at daily life, play, or spiritual observance. Oddly, some carvings seem humorous, like tiny dances frozen in stone. Scholars still debate whether such depictions served ceremonial, narrative, or purely expressive purposes. You trace one figure with your finger, feeling a quiet intimacy with the ancient creator, a whisper across time. Small desert flora pushes stubbornly between stones, resilient against wind and sun. Oddly, tiny offerings, bits of clay, painted stones, or shells, are tucked among them, suggesting human interaction with both environment and spirit. Scholars still argue about their purpose, yet their presence evokes connection and continuity. You inhale the dry, fragrant air, letting the desert's rhythm sync with your own pulse. Finally, as the night deepens, the vast silence of the desert surrounds you. Oddly, distant dunes seem to shimmer under starlight, like the land itself is breathing. Scholars still debate the social and cultural intricacies of desert life, but you feel the enduring pulse of human ingenuity and resilience woven across these sands. You recline on the dune crest, letting the wind, stars, and quiet history cradle you, preparing for the next journey through the fertile river valleys of ancient civilizations. You follow the desert's edge into fertile river valleys, where water brings life, growth, and the pulse of civilization. The contrast is immediate. Lush reeds sway, crops ripple in the wind, and the air is heavy with damp earth and vegetation. You probably won't survive the sensory overload of life returning to the land without letting your mind wander among the countless generations who depended on these waters. Each step is soft in the moist soil, carrying echoes of trade, labor, and daily routines that shaped entire societies. Along the riverbanks, small stone walls suggest early irrigation systems. Oddly, tiny carved figurines of humans, birds, and fish are tucked into the embankments, hinting at ritual protection or playful offerings. Scholars still debate whether these systems were primarily functional, ceremonial, or a seamless blend of both. You kneel to examine the stones, imagining farmers, priests, and children working together to nurture the land while honoring unseen forces. You wander past semi-submerged mud brick structures, where walls bear traces of vibrant pigments. Oddly, some depict animals with exaggerated features, elephants with elongated trunks, birds with spiraling wings, suggesting humor, storytelling, or symbolic significance. Scholars still argue whether these murals were practical, spiritual, or educational tools. You brush your fingers along the faint remnants of color, feeling the intimate connection between artistic expression and daily survival. Along the water, you notice boats once used for trade, fishing, or ceremonial journeys. Oddly, small carvings decorate their sides, waves, eyes, and abstract patterns. Scholars still debate whether these embellishments served protective, symbolic, or decorative purposes. You imagine travelers guiding their vessels, children peeking over edges, merchants exchanging goods, and elders watching the sun set over the flowing river. You come across remnants of marketplaces, stone slabs arranged in orderly rows, storage pits, and scattered pottery shards. Oddly, tiny clay figurines depicting exaggerated gestures or humorous expressions suggest playful interaction alongside commerce. Scholars still argue about the social and economic complexity of these communities. You stroll through the imagined stalls, hearing the faint hum of barter, laughter, and negotiation across time. Terraces along the river indicate agricultural sophistication. Oddly, small stones carved with spirals or animal forms are embedded among the crops, perhaps as charm, ritual, or whimsical decoration. Scholars still debate whether symbolism or practicality dominated early farming practices. You crouch to touch the soil, sensing the intimate rhythm between human labor, ingenuity, and nature's generosity. The river meanders toward larger settlements, where mud-brick temples and administrative buildings hint at governance and spiritual life. Oddly, tiny carvings of faces, animals, and geometric forms embellish corners and ledges, as though creators injected humor or narrative into the sacred and bureaucratic alike. Scholars still argue whether these designs primarily reflected ritual, storytelling, or aesthetics. You wander through imagined courtyards, feeling the pulse of both authority and intimacy that shaped daily life. Children's play leaves traces in subtle ways: depressions in the mud, small patterns of stones, and tiny clay figures tucked in corners. Oddly, these playful marks survive alongside ritual and administrative structures, reminding you that life balanced duty, faith, and joy. Scholars still debate the social importance of child-centered spaces in early civilizations. You crouch to trace one small figure, imagining a child centuries ago laughing, chasing, or learning alongside family and community. You follow faint channels where water once flowed into fields, sustaining crops and livestock. Oddly, miniature carvings of animals and humans are scattered along the embankments, perhaps as offerings, markers, or personal touches. Scholars still argue about the symbolic versus practical purposes of such objects. You trace the path of a tiny canal, feeling the pulse of life it carried, the livelihoods it supported, and the quiet ingenuity it demanded. The sun sets, painting the river and terraces in golden light. Oddly, some stones reflect this glow in playful ways, casting tiny shimmering patterns on the mud brick walls. Scholars still debate whether these effects were noticed and valued by ancient inhabitants, or purely coincidental. You let the warm light wash over you, imagining the harmony of work, worship, and play unfolding in this fertile landscape. As night descends, the river mirrors the emerging stars, creating twin skies above and below. Oddly, small ceremonial arrangements of stones along the banks echo celestial patterns, blending observation, ritual, and art. Scholars still argue about the exact function, yet the resonance is undeniable. You lie on soft grass by the river, letting the gentle ripple of water, the twinkle of stars, and the whispered presence of long-gone hands lull your mind. Finally, as the valley darkens, you feel the pulse of civilization, life, ingenuity, and imagination, flowing beneath your fingertips. Oddly, scattered stones, carvings, and remnants of daily life offer hints of laughter, devotion, and playful curiosity. Scholars still debate the intricacies of these communities, but you sense the continuity, the persistent rhythm of human experience merging with water, earth, and sky, readying you for the next journey into forests and hidden groves. You slip from the open riverlands into deep forests once again, but this time the trees feel older, the air heavier, the shadows denser. Everything is thicker here: the moss, the silence, the memories. You probably won't survive the drowsy, green hush of this place without feeling yourself slow down, your steps softening against centuries of fallen leaves and forgotten stories. Each footfall sinks into earth that has recorded thousands of years of human footsteps, rituals, and whispered secrets. You wander beneath towering trunks, their bark ridged and furrowed like the wrinkles of ancient faces. Oddly, small wooden carvings dangle from branches, tiny birds, spirals, and abstract shapes swaying gently in the breeze. Scholars still argue whether these pendants were protective charms, coded signals, or simply decorations left by bored forest dwellers. You lift one gently, feeling its smooth grain and the faint pulse of intention carved into it long ago. Farther in, the forest opens into patches of meadow where the sunlight puddles like warm honey. Oddly, rocks around the meadow's edge are arranged in looping patterns that resemble flowing rivers or dancing figures. Scholars still debate whether these stone loops marked ceremonial spaces, playful designs, or early forms of forest mapping. You crouch to trace one pathway of stones with your fingertips, feeling the strange yet soothing logic of its curves. You drift deeper, coming upon half-hidden huts pressed tightly against the bases of massive trees. Oddly, their entrances are shaped like exaggerated faces, wide-eyed, open-mouthed, or intriguingly asymmetrical. Scholars still argue whether these facades were intended to evoke spirits, ancestors, or just the sense of entering a large, friendly monster. You imagine pushing open one wooden door, stepping inside to find warmth, firelight, and soft chatter echoing beneath low wooden beams. The forest floor is dotted with mushrooms, herbs, and small fungi that glow faintly in shadowed corners. Oddly, some fungi appear in neatly arranged lines, like miniature parade formations. Scholars still debate whether this patterning was natural, cultivated, or part of ritual practice. You kneel, drawn by the soft glow, imagining herbalists or shamans gathering plants while murmuring stories about their healing or mystical properties. You approach a narrow stream winding through the trees, its water cool and sparkling. Oddly, smooth stones along its banks have carved grooves shaped like tiny footprints, far too small to belong to humans. Scholars still argue whether these marks were symbolic, representative of mythical creatures, or simple playful art by forest children. You dip your hand into the water, feeling its gentle flow, and let the mystery soften your thoughts. Further ahead, the trees grow closer together, forming natural archways overhead. Oddly, vines twist in symmetrical patterns that seem almost deliberate. Scholars still debate whether these formations were trained by human hands, influenced by rituals, or purely coincidental. You step beneath them slowly, feeling as though you're entering a sacred passage where history hums quietly all around you. You come across a clearing marked by circular burn patterns in the soil. Oddly, tiny piles of ash and stone remain, arranged in precise sequences like coded messages. Scholars still argue whether these circles reflect early astronomy, communal rituals, or symbolic storytelling. You sit at the edge of one, closing your eyes, picturing gatherings of people dancing, chanting, or sharing tales under the flickering firelight. Nearby, you find carved wooden masks leaning against a moss-draped boulder. Oddly, the masks display exaggerated expressions: joy, fear, surprise, almost cartoonish. Scholars still debate whether these masks were used in ritual theater, storytelling, or seasonal celebrations. You lift one mask gently, noticing the craftsmanship: carefully chiseled lines, delicate paint remnants, and the faint scent of resin clinging to its interior. You continue wandering until you reach a series of raised mounds covered in ferns and small shrubs. Oddly, the mounds form a perfect spiral, suggesting purposeful design. Scholars still argue whether these were burial sites, astronomical markers, or subterranean ceremonial chambers. You step along the spiral's path, feeling the weight of purpose beneath your feet, the sense of movement and rhythm encoded into the very earth. Deeper still, you pass clusters of tree stumps carved into seats, some simple, others ornate. Oddly, some have tiny holes drilled into their sides, forming patterns that might have produced whistle-like tones in strong winds. Scholars still debate whether these forest instruments were designed intentionally or simply accidental features that delighted their creators. You sit on one carved seat, letting the possibility of musical trees flutter through your imagination. At dusk, the forest begins to glow with fireflies. Oddly, some areas light up in synchronized bursts, almost as though responding to unseen cues. Scholars still argue whether ancient communities used this phenomenon as part of rituals, storytelling, or early seasonal indicators. You stand quietly, letting the blinking dance surround you in waves of soft, living lantern light. As night settles, you approach a giant hollow tree, its entrance shaped wide enough for you to step inside. Oddly, the interior walls are etched with spirals and looping trails, like maps of journeys or dreams. Scholars still debate whether such etched trees served as storytelling rooms, meditative spaces, or gathering points. You run your fingertips over the patterns, feeling the warmth of human touch preserved across centuries. Finally, you settle on a bed of soft moss near the tree's roots, the canopy above filtering moonlight in glowing patches. Oddly, faint trails of luminescent lichen trace patterns on the bark, forming gentle, swirling shapes that mimic river currents or drifting constellations. Scholars still argue about their origin, natural phenomenon or deliberate placement, but in this moment, the debate doesn't matter. You inhale deeply, letting the scent of moss, bark, and distant campfire memories fill your senses, the hum of the ancient forest easing you toward the quieter world waiting in the sands and shelter of ancient camps ahead. You drift from the dense forest into a stretch of land where ancient camps once flickered with firelight, laughter, and the steady beat of communal living. The air warms slightly, carrying hints of smoke, roasted grains, and the earthy scent of well-trodden soil. You probably won't survive the cozy, almost nostalgic calm of these old gathering grounds without feeling yourself settle into a slower rhythm, as though your breath instinctively matches the rise and fall of long-extinct campfires. You walk across a broad clearing dotted with low humps of earth, what remains of temporary shelters built centuries ago. Oddly, some humps hide tiny clay tokens shaped like animals or human figures with exaggerated expressions. Scholars still argue whether these were good luck charms, teaching tools, or playful creations left behind by bored or imaginative camp residents. You kneel to lift one, feeling its textured surface and the spark of someone's personality preserved in fired clay. Along the clearing's edge, blackened circles in the soil show where cooking fires once burned. Oddly, you find a few stones arranged around them in patterns that resemble sunbursts or simple faces. Scholars still debate whether these were purely practical ways to contain heat or part of symbolic rituals marking the fire as a sacred communal center. You sit beside one burnt circle, imagining the crackle of flames, soft chatter, and the smell of fresh grains crisping in clay pots. Further on, you discover long, shallow pits used for roasting or drying food. Oddly, tiny carved wooden sticks, some painted, some etched with spirals, are scattered nearby. Scholars still argue whether these sticks were used as tools, ceremonial items, or even early forms of decorative cutlery. You pick one up, imagining ancient hands stirring pots, poking coals, or simply doodling spirals while waiting for food to cook. Soft trails weave outward from the fire circles, worn by centuries of feet moving between water sources, forests, and hunting grounds. Oddly, you spot little piles of stones stacked along the trails, each pile different, some tall and narrow, others wide and squat. Scholars still debate whether these were directional markers, personal signatures, or just the early human impulse to stack things for fun. You give one pile a gentle tap, watching a tiny pebble roll down like it's been waiting ages to be freed. The terrain opens into a flat plain where temporary tents once stood. Oddly, you find faint patterns in the soil, circles, squares, and wavy lines, possibly made by pressing carved mats or woven textiles into fresh dirt. Scholars still argue whether these imprints had practical purposes for leveling ground, or if they were simply the decorative footprint of nomadic life. You crouch, tracing a spiral pattern that looks both intentional and beautifully random. Nearby, remains of cooking pots lie half buried in the ground. Oddly, some sport humorous carvings on their sides, wide-eyed animals, exaggerated human faces, or abstract shapes that look suspiciously like ancient cartoon doodles. Scholars still debate whether these were expressions of joy, warnings, or inside jokes within the community. You turn over one pot shard, imagining someone carving a silly face into clay just to make others laugh during long evenings. As you wander, you come across low stone circles that may have once held ritual gatherings. Oddly, some stones have little grooves shaped like arrows or waves. Scholars still argue whether these grooves represented directions, offerings, or something more symbolic. You run your hand along one groove, and it feels almost like a pathway into someone's memory, guiding you deeper into the life that once flowed here. You follow faint footsteps, some preserved by chance, some carved deliberately into hardened soil or rock. Oddly, a few sets are unusually small, perhaps children's, and around them are scattered tiny clay beads. Scholars still debate whether these beads were toys, ornaments, or early currency. You scoop up a bead, its weight surprisingly comforting, imagining it threaded on a string, traded between small hands, or treasured inside a little pouch. As day fades, you reach a communal area where long wooden posts once held up canopies for group meals, storytelling, and crafting. Oddly, some posts are etched with swirling designs that resemble flames, rain, and animals. Scholars still argue whether these were ceremonial motifs, teaching aids, or artistic expressions. You touch the grooves, feeling their intentional flow and the pulse of meaning layered across time. A short walk brings you to a ridge overlooking a shallow river. Oddly, on the ridge's edge lie smooth stones arranged in curved lines, like waves frozen in place. Scholars still debate whether these were symbolic markers, seating areas, or attempts at early landscape art. You sit on one, letting your legs dangle over the ridge, imagining people doing the same, talking, watching the river, or tossing stones into the current. Below, the river glimmers under the setting sun. Oddly, you spot tiny carved wooden fish stuck in the mud along the banks, their exaggerated fins and expressive faces worn smooth. Scholars still argue whether these figurines were used for teaching fishing techniques, ritual offerings, or simple storytelling props. You pluck one from the mud, laughing quietly at its wide-eyed, permanently startled expression. As the evening deepens, fireflies begin drifting through the clearing, their soft glow hovering around remnants of old fire pits. Oddly, some charred stones reflect the light in faint patterns, as if someone once embedded minerals or pigments into them deliberately. Scholars still debate whether these glowing effects were intentional or just happy accidents. You sit beside the stones, watching the fireflies create a slow-pulsing constellation at ground level. Night settles fully, and you feel the warmth that once radiated from countless fires, meals, stories, and gatherings. Oddly, you find a half-buried wooden flute, cracked but still intact, etched with tiny lines that form a looping path from top to bottom. Scholars still argue whether such flutes were used for ritual, entertainment, or communication across camps. You don't play it, but you imagine the soft, airy notes drifting through the clearing, weaving seamlessly with laughter, wind, and the rustle of canvas shelters. You lie down on warm earth, the night sky clear above you. Oddly, the constellations seem to align faintly with the stone arrangements around the camp, as if someone long ago mirrored the sky onto the earth. Scholars still debate the intention, but you feel the resonance deeply, the desire to understand the world by mapping it, mirroring it, and celebrating it. You inhale, letting the scent of wood smoke and soil drift through your senses, preparing for the final steps of your journey, towards silent shores and the quietest, sleepiest corners of ancient memory. You glide from the warm earth of ancient camps toward a coastline where the air turns cool and salty, carrying the soft hum of distant waves. You can feel the world widening around you, sky stretching, water deepening, and the stories of countless civilizations gathering like mist along the edge of memory. You probably won't survive the gentleness of this shoreline without your mind melting just a little, your shoulders loosening, your breath growing quieter with every step you take across the sand. You wander along the beach, each foot sinking into grains shaped by tides older than any empire. Oddly, scattered across the shore you find seashells carved with tiny geometric patterns, triangles, spirals, and stripes that look almost mathematical. Scholars still argue whether these decorations were symbolic markers, simple art, or early attempts at recording seasonal tides. You pick one up, feeling its faint ridges and the soft tingle of human hands echoing through time. The waves lap gently, and you notice weathered wooden planks emerging at low tide, remnants of ancient boats worn down to ghostly silhouettes. Oddly, some planks still bear faint painted lines, zigzags and dots that seem both decorative and directional. Scholars still debate whether these markings were navigational aids, spiritual symbols, or just an artist's flourish added before a long sea voyage. You kneel beside one plank, letting the water wash against your fingers, imagining sailors pushing off at dawn toward unknown horizons. You drift farther along the beach until you spot stone foundations half buried in sand, once part of small coastal settlements now reclaimed by shifting tides. Oddly, the stones are arranged in oddly precise rectangles, as though someone loved symmetry far more than practicality. Scholars still argue whether these strict layouts followed ritual guidelines, community planning, or were simply the preference of a leader obsessed with neatness. You step inside one rectangular ghost room, tracing its edges with your feet as the wind brushes past you like a memory. A little inland, dunes rise like rolling hills, golden and soft beneath the sunlight. Oddly, the tops of some dunes hold clusters of pebbles arranged in circular formations. Scholars still debate whether travelers place these stones as markers for safe routes, memorials, or just moments of quiet creativity in an open landscape. You stand atop one dune, feeling the wind tug at your clothes, and imagine a traveler centuries ago stopping to do the same, breathing in the sea, adjusting their pack, moving on. Closer to the water, you find remnants of fishing nets preserved miraculously in pockets of cool, damp sand. Oddly, some nets have beads woven into their cords, tiny seashell pieces, bone fragments, and carved wooden bits. Scholars still argue whether these beads served practical weights, decorative choices, or symbolic blessings for a successful catch. You lift part of a net, the beads clicking softly together like whispered conversation. The coastline arcs toward rocky cliffs where tide pools shimmer in small pockets. Oddly, along the cliffs you spot ancient handholds cut into the stone, creating a climbing path so perfect it feels modern. Scholars still debate whether these routes were used for fishing, ritual ascents, or lookout points for spotting incoming boats. You run your hand along one carved notch, imagining bare feet and steady hands reaching upward with purpose. The wind shifts, carrying hints of smoke and herbs, drawing you toward a shallow cave where people once gathered to escape storms or to tell stories by firelight. Oddly, the walls of the cave are decorated with simple charcoal drawings, boats with oversized sails, fish with expressive faces, and human figures holding what appear to be baskets overflowing with something round. Scholars still argue whether these drawings record myth, memory, or a celebration of an unusually good harvest season. You brush your fingertips along one wall, feeling tiny flecks of charcoal crumble gently, resting like soot on your skin. Near the cave entrance, you discover fragments of pottery with intricate wave patterns. Oddly, some pots are shaped asymmetrically, lopsided, almost playful, as if the creator enjoyed bending the rules of pottery tradition. Scholars still debate whether these odd shapes were intentional art, functional experiments, or the work of apprentices learning the craft. You turn one shard over, letting the patterns catch the light, mesmerized by how much personality a broken piece of clay can hold. You step back toward the water, where cliffs drop sharply into turquoise pools. Oddly, carved steps descend into the sea itself, stone steps, worn smooth by centuries of waves. Scholars still argue whether these steps were used for ritual bathing, launching small boats, or conducting ceremonies involving the tide. You walk down to the edge, stopping just before the water touches your toes, feeling the rhythmic push and pull of the ocean like a slow, ancient heartbeat. A little farther down the shore, you find remnants of a long wooden pier, its supports still jutting from the sea like ribs of a great, fallen creature. Oddly, the top beams are carved with rows of tiny dots arranged in repeating sequences. Scholars still debate whether these sequences were numeric records, fishing tallies, or simple decorative rhythms. You run your hand along one beam, imagining the pier bustling with life, merchants shouting, children running, ropes creaking as boats rock gently. As the tide continues to lower, another shape emerges from the water, the corner of a stone structure, perhaps the remains of a lighthouse or coastal shrine. Oddly, dolphins and waves are carved along its sides, but one dolphin is given comically oversized eyes. Scholars still argue whether this exaggerated dolphin was part of a story, a warning, or just someone's attempt at artistic humor in a solemn structure. You smile at the carving, feeling a strange kinship with whoever chiseled it long ago. You wander inland again, following a faint trail lined with small piles of sea-polished stones. Oddly, every 10th pile contains a perfectly flat piece of slate tucked on top. Scholars still debate whether these slates mark distances, memorials, or simply a counting system for travelers. You tap one slate softly, hearing its delicate echo fade into the warm air. Eventually, the trail leads you to a wide circular clearing framed by low mounds. Oddly, each mound has a flat-topped stone placed at its center, arranged so that from above they would resemble a ring of stepping stones. Scholars still argue whether this place held markets, rituals, or seasonal meetings. You stand in the center of the circle, feeling the faint hum of communal energy, voices murmuring, feet shifting, hands exchanging goods or blessings under an open sky. As the sun dips closer to the horizon, the sky turns a soft gold that melts slowly into rose and violet hues. Oddly, tiny glimmers sparkle at your feet, chips of obsidian and quartz scattered in deliberate arcs. Scholars still debate whether these stones were remnants of tools, offerings, or decorative flourishes meant to catch sunset light. You crouch and hold up a tiny shard, watching it shine like a small captured star. You continue walking as stars begin appearing one by one above the water. Oddly, the shape of distant constellations mirrors patterns you noticed earlier in the stone arrangements and pottery designs. Scholars still argue whether ancient coastal people deliberately mapped the heavens or simply echoed them unconsciously in their art. You tilt your head back, letting the night sky fill your view until it presses gently against the edges of your thoughts. The ocean grows quieter as if listening to your footsteps. The breeze softens. Everything around you slows to a drowsy rhythm. You feel the presence of all those forgotten hands, voices, and lives, farmers, sailors, children, storytellers, drifting like faint echoes along the shoreline. Their legacies are not in monuments or conquests but in the small, enduring imprints they left behind. Carvings in shells, patterns in pottery, footprints in stone. Oddly, one last thing catches your eye. A single, smooth pebble carved into a perfect spiral. Scholars still debate whether spirals symbolized birth, memory, or the cyclical nature of life. You hold the pebble gently, feeling its soft weight in your palm, and you sense how everything you've seen, from deserts to forests to river valleys to these quiet shores, spirals together into one long, continuous story. You tuck the spiral into the sand again, letting it rest right where it belongs. Then you ease yourself down onto the warm beach, the sound of waves soothing, constant, and deeply ancient. The stars shimmer above you, and you feel the final ember of countless civilizations glowing softly, still alive in the gentle rhythm of the world. Your eyes grow heavy. Your breath slows. You feel the edges of history dissolving into the soft hush of the ocean, guiding you toward the quiet tide of sleep. The night stretches above you, vast and calm, a velvet canopy punctuated with distant stars blinking softly as if they've been waiting just for you. The ocean murmurs a slow lullaby, each wave brushing the shore with gentle persistence, a timeless rhythm that mirrors the steady beat of your own heart. You probably won't survive this serenity without letting every muscle in your body sink, letting your thoughts drift like tiny driftwood across the dark water. The air smells faintly of salt, earth, and distant wood smoke, mingling in a way that feels comforting, familiar, and achingly human. You breathe it in slowly, letting it fill your chest, calming every restless corner of your mind. Tiny pebbles under your fingers feel smooth, grounding you in this present moment, even as your imagination drifts across deserts, forests, river valleys, and ancient camps. All of those stories, all of those lives, seem to gather around you, whispering quietly in the spaces between the waves and the stars. You feel the warmth of the sand against your back, soft and supportive, as if the earth itself is cradling you. The breeze brushes past like a lullaby, carrying distant scents and the faint echoes of laughter, footsteps, and whispers long gone. You notice how your eyelids are growing heavy, your breathing slow and measured, matching the rhythm of the gentle tide. Above, constellations twinkle in an effortless pattern, reminding you of cycles, continuity, and the beauty of small marks left across vast time. You let your imagination soften further, picturing the spiral carvings, tiny figurines, and playful marks of countless humans who once walked these lands, all resting gently within you as companions on this quiet night. Every sound, every sensation, lulls you deeper. The whisper of wind, the soft lap of water, the distant echo of history, it all blends into a seamless hum, wrapping around you like a soft blanket. You feel